One of the benefits of all of these great presentations staying more or less in time is that we can do two things. One, I'm going to ask a question of the panel. And then two, climate counselors, think of a question you might have for folks, because we do have a few minutes if you have a question for these panelists, all right? But my question, I'm going to go ask each of you to have a quick reflection on this, is you've been hard at work for 6 to 8 months on this, and I'm curious if there's a moment, like an aha moment or a big learning that you had in this process that helped shape this final thinking that you presented today. So if you think for just a moment, was there something that happened over those 6 months that really stood out for you personally and for the group that changed the course of how you did this work this time around? And we can start at the center of the table and work our way down. And these mics should work if you lean into them, maybe. They're on. Okay. I'll just lean right in.
Okay, thank you, David. And also for giving us this question ahead of time.
Yeah.
I think my aha moment was to hear that while we thought the addition of the retreat, getting out of harm's way strategy was important, we were hearing from the regional coordinators and from MEMA that communities themselves are asking for assistance in having those conversations. It's not just our idea. And that also, for me, underscored the relevance and significance of the mental health focus that we had on the impacts of climate change.
Thanks, Becca.
I think for me, it was a conversation we were having in our working group about meeting with people in our communities to talk about climate change. And I'm looking at Dr. Tora Johnson because it was her story that really was my spark for this. But really just reflecting on, and we did share this in our recommendations, but the intersectionality of these issues and the competing priorities, like housing, like food insecurity, economic insecurity, and also violence prevention at the community level. Research shows that there's more violence in communities on higher heat days. And so really when we think about our response, we really need to have an intersectional, broader view of our efforts.
Thanks, Becca. Carl?
Yeah, at least for myself, it clearly came on the heels of the storms that hit the coast in early January. And really this feel of needing to fight back against climate change and some of the impacts along the coast, and just really taking that as a charge to move forward. It's not just sitting back and monitoring; it's fighting back.
Thanks, Carl. Kurt?
My head went right to the same place Carl's did, and standing January 10th right at Portland Headlight, watching a wave crash up over the rocks and blow out the windows at that, iconic lighthouse. But then the more I thought of it, it went towards the presentation we had however many months ago where Susie Arnold talked about the science of hope around climate change and how that kind of changed my frame of reference. And while a lot of it is doom and gloom, there are opportunities to do positive things in the face of this. And I thought about how one of the members of our working group, Chuck Bennett, who's a multi-generational lobsterman from Sorrento, is getting involved with science in addition to going out on the water and harvesting. He's installing temperature sensors on a lot of his traps, helping to collect data that will inform decisions going forward. So that whole power of hope in the face of all this is something that I think is really important. And in the spirit of that, I was hoping Susie would be here, but I don't think she is. But that was really powerful.
Yeah. Thanks, Kurt. Amanda?
I think I turned it off.
Yeah.
There were so many takeaways through all these discussions, and I think the one that just really stands out to me the most is that figure that we would have to really pick up the pace of land conservation 5 times, greater than what we're doing right now. And what would that mean? What would that take? But also, what would we gain from that? And so I think there's so much to be gained that we just really need to figure that out.
Thanks. Tom?
Yeah, I think just to build on what Amanda said, that was one that I've been thinking about as well. It's about resources too, and about how much new money that we can bring to the table so that we can build on that and get to that 30% figure. It's been a high priority for the administration, where the governor put in $40 million a few years ago. That money is now spent, and so how do we move forward with an even bigger number in the remaining years of the administration. And then two, I would just say, as I think about the forests of Maine and where things are headed, we know that that the species that we love today are changing, and that they won't be here in 100 or 200 years. You think about, softwoods like the pine, white pine, balsam fir, spruce, they're all migrating up. And so we kind of can conserve and protect the stage, but the actors will change over time.
So, Melanie?
I think the moment for me was when Dr. Reed Miller from University of Maine did a presentation and training on the consumption-based inventory. I've been working on Maine's territorial inventory for 16 years, and tracking our progress and personally assessing the work that we're doing against that, and realized that there are so many things, policy choices, strategies that we contemplate that we're not capturing with that analytical method, and that there are other ways that we can be measuring what we could do to make a contribution to reductions both nationally and globally, and not just here within our own state.
Thanks. And even though our statutory requirements in Maine are around that territorial inventory, that doesn't mean we can't look at the consumption-based
That's
piece
right.
too. Okay. So I wanted to create a moment, if there are counselors in particular or other co-chairs that had questions for this panel. Brian's got a mic. There might be another mic kicking around too. Yep, great. So we've got two mics. Any questions, reactions that you'd want to share with this panel before we take a break and do it all over again? This is a good chance to ask a question.
Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to help that out. Hi, y'all. Is this working?
There it is.
Thanks. Just giving the commissioner a hard time. But I'm going to bring you up here, so be nice to me.
Don't forget to introduce.
I'm Kate Dempsey, council member and state director for the Nature Conservancy. And there's a couple things that were my ahas. One is around the resilience working group and the coastal and oceans working group. I'm curious as whether there's a way to focus on mental health resources within fishing communities. You mentioned frontline workers, and it occurred to me that our fishing communities are frontline workers in a perhaps not what I normally think of when I hear that term. And then Brian knows that I'm a big advocate of road stream infrastructure, and we also saw those huge storms in December. So I'm also thinking of inland rural communities and how to focus on people trying to get to work at great distance. So you don't need to answer, but it was an intersection that struck me.
Although you could answer if you wanted to.
So I'll try a partial answer. One of the things that we didn't mention was that the Coastal and Marine and the Community Resilience Working Group actually got together to discuss our recommendations and shared drafts to ensure that we were working simultaneously, not at cross purposes. And the focus on mental health and developing a sense of agency over what we can do about this absolutely came up with the Coastal and Marine Working Group in fishing communities. So it's in there for sure, as well as it came up again in many more of our recommendations focused on inland and rural communities. So I think it's in there, and I'm delighted that you'll be searching for it.
Great. And Joyce Taylor and Jeff Crawford, when they come up and talk about transportation, maybe can jump on the culverts issue. Yeah.
First of all, on? It is on. Hello, you can hear me now. Hannah Pingree, great to see you all. Great job. So a lot of the recommendations, I think, the Climate Council is all sitting up front, and our job is to now take these recommendations and think about what's next. I think the exciting thing about the last plan that we are building on is that they immediately led to lots of people at the local level, towns, businesses, nonprofits, sort of helping to take these recommendations and running with them, especially the private sector, the nonprofit sector. I think about hospitals, I think about businesses, schools. I wonder if you can each reflect on sort of what you hope when you think about some of your biggest recommendations. What would you love to see in like 2 years happening on the ground that state government's not doing, but some other private sector has really engaged in and started to build? Tom, I'm going to put you on the spot.
No, don't.
Some large landowners, big farms.
Yeah, I guess for me it would be the forest carbon space, and there are a lot of programs, voluntary programs, regulatory programs all throughout the country, and even at the international level. I would like to see some of that coalesce and get a little bit more mature so that Maine can better participate in it. It feels like it's kind of shifting sands right now, and it's hard to know what role, if any, the state should play. And I'm hoping that in a couple of years, that'll be a little bit more baked.
This is a question for all of you.
Yeah. Feel free to jump in on that. Like, again, a lot of this is directed to state government, and what should other folks be doing with this?
Did you say you wanted to take it, or did you say you want me to take it? Let's both take it.
Okay.
Make sure the mic's on.
From my perspective, I think coming out of the pandemic, the fishing industry has just been faced with one whammy after another, whether it be the storms this winter or right whales or any number of issues. I mean, just yesterday we learned the preliminary assessment for Gulf of Maine cod, and the recommended catch is 90% lower than it has been in recent years. It's not final yet, but it's dire what some of our fisheries are going up against. And in the face of this, I think we've seen a rightful anger and pushing back from the fishing industry. And so what my hope would be is that we fight back together. The worst thing that we could have is kind of this polarization where the department really only succeeds when we're working with the fishing industry and moving in the same direction. And the issues are too big and the stakes are too high not to do that. And so I think we need to get back at the table and get conversations that are continuing, but they need to be reinforced. So I don't know.
No, that's spot on, and I think 2 takeaways for me were collaboration and communication, really where the rubber meets the road. We just saw a lot of words, and behind those words were a lot of ideas and a lot of work. But ultimately, if we can communicate and collaborate really, truly where the rubber meets the road, and I'm looking at you, Kathleen, and the commission that the governor just put together, the first meeting we had was right there at the co-op in Stonington. And that's a real, quick turnaround, but a good case study of what we can do as a state to build resilience and really adapt to what's going on.
Thanks. Anything else on that topic of what other actors you would like to see?
So I love the question, Hannah, and I'm thinking about it in the land use context and the housing crisis that we're facing. And I heard a segment a week or so ago from, I think it was Red Fern, their development company, where this fellow very articulately laid out that good growth strategies are climate strategies. Walkable, livable, wonderful, multi-use communities that address housing can be those that also address climate. And to hear that come from the private sector so articulately was wonderful, and I'd love to see more of that within communities and the development community.
I had one.
Yeah, Becca, go ahead, please.
So in the nonprofit world, a lot of times our funding is program specific or kind of really topic specific. And one thing I would love to see is an allowance for this more intersectional work. And so if you're working on housing and security, you also have a space to be working on climate related efforts. So I think looking to funders that support a lot of the nonprofits to be able to have kind of a wider lens in the work that we do.
Nice. Thanks, Becca. Melanie.
Our task force heard some presentations from really cool businesses that are doing refill of containers, reuse, and repair. And, those have formed all on their own. And, if I were to say what I would hope to see happen in the next 2 years is I would love to see increased demand in Maine for those kind of services across the state. That those are new businesses, those are new jobs, those are products and services being made and bought here in Maine. Just like we talk about buying food locally, wouldn't it be great to have these businesses enabling us to reduce the amount of waste we're generating by reusing the things that we're buying here in the state and creating new jobs as a part of that?
On that hopeful note, let's take a 20-minute break. We're going to be back here at 10:45. However, the most important thing to do is thank our presenters for giving us all this information.